Hello and welcome to an India Today special broadcast that comes from Kazan in Russia. I'm Gaurav Sawant. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping are likely to have a bilateral discussion on the sidelines of the 16th BRICS summit, and all eyes on that crucial meeting that could take place in the next 24 hours. India and China have remained in a standoff situation all along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh since the summer of 2020. While multiple friction points, the situation was sorted out to an extent that it led to disengagement on the north and south banks of Pangong Tso or Gogra or Hot Springs. Two issues remained. One was Depsang in the north and the second was Demchok in the south. But do remember, the two almost clashed in the east in North Sikkim, actually the tri-junction between India, Bhutan and Tibet in 2017 in the Doklam region, where Indian troops actually went across and they stopped Chinese road construction. Tension was building up ever since, but it came to a pass in 2020. At Galwan, India lost 20 soldiers. The Chinese, by their own admission, one commanding officer and 4 soldiers. But according to Russia, their official agency TASS, the Chinese lost 44 soldiers. After that, 4 years of persistent and perseverant diplomacy, India and China have decided to disengage. That disengagement process has taken place. But how did this come about? We bring you more in this report.
A border breakthrough by India and China, a path that leads to the end of the big Ladakh standoff. A day after India made the surprise declaration that a resolution towards peace had been achieved, China has also confirmed a pact with India to end the standoff between the two armies in eastern Ladakh.
Over a recent period of time, China and India have been in close communication through diplomatic and military channels on issues related to China-India border. Now the two sides have reached resolutions on relevant matters, which China speaks highly of. Going forward, China will continue to work with India to implement these resolutions.
The details remain broad. No deals are ever straightforward with China, and the road to the agreement hasn't been an easy one. It was a result of weeks of intense diplomatic and military negotiations. Caution is probably a good idea before celebrating any real breakthrough, but according to government sources, several meetings involving both the Ministry of External Affairs and the Indian Army did take place, with discussions focused on ensuring smooth patrolling in areas where disengagement has already occurred in eastern Ladakh. But the Depsang and Demchok areas presented unique challenges due to their strategic importance and heightened tensions. Rebuilding trust will be key.
The Chinese side is wanting to restore the relationship between India and China to what it was earlier. It wants the other aspects of the relationship like trade, commerce, investment to move ahead. It will, of course, take some time to restore the trust between the two countries, but at least I think a beginning can be made.
India and China have come to an agreement about normal patrolling and that there will be disengagement. And the Foreign Secretary says that, we are now looking at the resolution of the problem which arose in 2020. This is welcome, but let me put it this way, trust but verify.
The timing of the thaw is also crucial. India improving ties with China comes just when it is being hounded by Western powers over alleged operations to kill pro-Khalistani terrorists in those countries. Many experts believe a defreeze in India-China ties could pose a new challenge to the United States. In fact, that could very much be why the two countries have found an opportunity to at least try setting aside their differences. The possibility of India and China going further in resolving their various other disputes will worry the United States, that thinks India has an important role to play in policing the Indo-Pacific to contain Chinese influence. Closer ties between Russia, China and India could also establish the global south as a counterweight to Western hegemony. in a world at war. Bureau Report, India Today.
India and China, two strong neighbors. The largest population in the world earlier in China, now in India. So the two most populous countries, the two Asian giants, one a superpower, one an emerging superpower, and two countries that have shared a very close civilizational link, from the Silk Route to Huanshan to Fahian, coming to India to study Indian culture, the travel, the way Buddhism traveled to China. So there is a very old link between the two countries. And when the two countries became independent, there was also a clash in 1962. India was still dreaming under that Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai euphoria, and Chinese troops, once they came into Indian territory, there was a conflict. The Chinese were stalled in Ladakh, but they came rampaging in the east wherever they were stopped. The Battle of Walong, for example, which led to severe casualties. But the Chinese realized when Indian soldiers stand their ground, the Chinese are forced to retreat. And China only respects strength. But Walong was one incident. Chushul and the very, very famous Battle of Rizangla is another instance. But then there were multiple instances in history. 1967 at Nathula, when the Indian artillery opened up and sent across a very strong message to China. Or Sundarongchu, once again, when India was able to send across a very strong message to China. The standoff then lasted close to 5 years. Ultimately, it led to not just dialogue, discussion, but also multiple mechanisms being put in place. And those mechanisms have stayed in place, and several new mechanisms have come up. But then the two countries came very close to a shooting war when China violated those mechanisms. We get you more in this report.
62 years ago, nearly 1,500 Indian soldiers died, and another 1,500 remained missing forever when India met China on the battlefield. In 1962, independent India was a tender 15 years old, when it was humiliatingly crushed by a far more focused, far more relentless China. As newly established republics in the 1940s, India and China had a healthy and mutual impulse towards each other. The diplomatic affection between the two countries became an undeniable template for a world that was recovering after two destructive world wars and decades of colonialism. In 1951, India refused to attend the conference in San Francisco, where a peace treaty with Japan was to be signed, simply because China was not invited. India, by its actions, made it amply clear that stability in Asia would be threatened if China was left in the cold. At the pinnacle of their famous mutual warmth, in 1954, India and China signed the legendary Panchsheel, an agreement based on 5 principles that would guide and forever solidify their peaceful coexistence. But at every step, as it turned out, India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was being carefully and meticulously deceived. In 1956, China built a road cutting through Ladakh's Aksai Chin area, connecting Xinjiang and Tibet, making the Aksai Chin area far more easily accessible to People's Liberation Army than its Indian counterpart. In the eastern sector, in the then Northeast Frontier Agency, or NEFA, Indian troops began patrolling heights that China saw as a violation of the disputed McMahon Line. In 1961 and early 1962, a series of skirmishes saw the two armies come over closer to a confrontation. Then, on October 20th, 1962, the first Chinese shells came screaming down, and the war began. On October 20th, 3 regiments of Chinese troops mounted a blistering attack along the southern bank of the Namkha River. On 22nd October, the Chinese attacked Walong on the McMahon line. After some resistance by Indian counter-fire, sheer numbers overwhelmed the Indian position. Crossing the Bamla Pass, Chinese troops mounted a 3-pronged attack on Tawang. Woefully under-equipped, undermanned, Indian army formations offered no resistance. In 3 days, the Northeast Frontier Agency was gone. The Chinese were in control. But the East was only one side of a terrifying campaign. There was also Ladakh. The situation in Ladakh's Aksai Chin was infinitely worse. Although disputed, it was already almost entirely under Chinese control. On October 20th, Chinese forces opened up their battle in the western sector with assaults on the Chimchap Valley, Galwan and Pangong Lake. The Indian army suffered huge casualties as the Chinese mounted a string of attacks through the western sector. On October 24th, the war abruptly ceased, and there was little or no fighting for 3 full weeks. After 4 days of crushing battle, the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai wrote to the Indian Prime Minister proposing 4 things: a negotiated settlement of the boundary, that both sides disengage and withdraw 20 kilometers from present lines of actual control, a Chinese withdrawal not in Nefa, and that China and India not cross lines of present control in Ladakh's Aksai Chin. Nehru replied that he was interested in peace but wanted a withdrawal to positions held before the forward deployments that preceded the war. The Indian Parliament declared a national emergency and rapidly passed a resolution to drive out the aggressors from the sacred soil of India. On November 14th, Nehru told Zhou Enlai there would be no deal. Hours later, the war resumed, both in Nefa and in Ladakh. After a 3-week lull, the war resumed. On 18th November, the Chinese overran Bomdila, the southernmost strategic point that they were to occupy. The road to the plains lay open before them, when they declared a unilateral ceasefire along the entire border and announced withdrawal of its troops to 20 kilometers behind the LAC. It was a short war which cast a long shadow of shame. There was a little pride in the fact that a great young nation had been chastised in front of the world.
China has constantly tested waters to check India's resolve, and it's been their history. Each time there was a summit between India and China, they would be talking about Hindi, Chini, Bhai Bhai and close civilizational links, but their soldiers each time would be at the borders transgressing, whether it was the pre-2014 era or even post-2014. You've had clashes in Depsang, you've had clashes in Chumar, then 2017 in Doklam, where Indian soldiers stalled the road construction because that was detrimental to India's security. And then, of course, 2020 at Galwan, and that standoff lasted till 2024. Disengagement has been announced, partial disengagement has taken place, and there is an agreement that India will go up to all our patrol points, whether in Depsang or in Demchok, cross the Raki Nala, and the Chinese, of course, and the Y Junction, and go up to all our patrolling points, and the Chinese side will come up to their claim line in Depsang and in Demchok. There's a mechanism that's being worked out so that there are no more clashes. Even if soldiers come face to face, the effort is to ensure they don't come face to face. And there is, again, a method to verify When are their soldiers coming in? When are our soldiers going across up to the patrol points and not all the way up to our claim line? So that's a very critical gap that India needs to address. That why do we go only up to those patrol points and not up to our claim lines? What happens? Do we go up to finger 8 or will they escort us till finger 8, which was the mechanism pre the 2020 standoff? Will we escort them till finger 2 or finger 4? All of those remain in the realm of speculation just as yet. But there is one lesson that's very clear. China respects strength. When you do a QPQ operation, China realizes that this is an army you can't mess around with. When you persevere with your strong diplomacy, that only when there is peace and tranquility at the borders can the relationship move forward. When that message is sent across at multiple levels, China finally reads the writing on the wall.
In the 62 years since the India-China war, there have been multiple points of lows and highs between the two countries. So much so that they had become constant niggling points, but never again did they escalate to the heights of war thunder. In 2014, Narendra Modi-led BJP came to power. And soon, things started to go south between India and China. 3 months after the swearing-in of the government, a 16-day standoff occurred between India and China near Chumar in eastern Ladakh in September 2014. The conflict began when Chinese troops attempted to extend a road into territory claimed by India, prompting Indian soldiers to block the construction. Simultaneously, a standoff occurred at the LAC in Demchok, Ladakh, when Indian workers began building a canal, prompting Chinese forces to push civilians into Indian territory to disrupt the irrigation project. The standoff saw 1,500 Indian troops face off against 750 Chinese soldiers for 3 weeks. The confrontation ended after both sides agreed to withdraw their troops. A year later, there was another brief standoff between India and Chinese forces at Burtse in the Depsang Plains, northern Ladakh. Following the demolition of a temporary hut by the Indo-Tibetan Border Police in 2015. The hut was allegedly built by People's Liberation Army for surveillance. Both sides reinforced their troop presence in the area. The standoff was resolved within a week through local level negotiations without government intervention. 2 years later, the India-China standoff was much longer and tense. The 2017 Doklam standoff was a 73-day military confrontation between the Indian Armed Forces and the PLA over the construction of a road by Chinese troops in the disputed Doklam region near the Indo-China-Bhutan tri-junction. On 16th June 2017, Chinese troops began extending a road in the area. 2 days later, India, in support of Bhutan, started Operation Juniper, deploying around 270 troops with 2 bulldozers to halt the construction. The standoff lasted over 2 months. On 28 August 2017, India and China withdrew the troops from the site, ending the standoff. Things will remain relatively cooler for the next 3 years, till the summer of 2020, the year of COVID pandemic. From May 5th, 2020, Chinese and Indian troops engaged in aggressive melee, face-offs and skirmishes near the disputed Pangong Lake in Ladakh and the Tibet Autonomous Region on the other side. Additional clashes also took place in eastern Ladakh along the line of actual control. In late May, Chinese forces objected to Indian road construction in the Galwan River Valley. The scuffle between two sides between 15th and 16th June resulted in the deaths of Chinese and Indian soldiers. On 7th of September, for the first time in 45 years, shots were fired along the LAC, with both sides blaming each other for the firing. Partial disengagement from Galwan, Hot Springs and Gogra occurred in June to July 2020, while complete disengagement from Pangong Lake North and South Bank took place in February 2021. A year and a half later, on 9th of December 2022, PLA troops tried to transgress the LAC in Yangtze area of Tawang sector in Arunachal Pradesh and unilaterally changed the status quo. The Chinese attempt was contested by Indian troops in a firm and resolute manner. Nearly 2 years have passed since that skirmish, and after several rounds of talks, both sides have once again come to see eye to eye. But the question is, how long can the tiger and the dragon remain crouching and vigilant about each other?
India has systematically pursued diplomacy to find a solution to the India-China standoff, at the same time ensuring that you have 50,000 troops, the tanks, the armored personnel carriers, the 155mm howitzers, the multi-barrel rocket launchers and the fighter jets. The synergy between the Indian armed forces, quick movement of men and material were there for all to see. India may initially have been surprised with the Chinese transgressions, but was quickly able to have mirrored deployment, and that shows that India in 2024 or post-2020 is no longer the pushover that the Chinese may have perceived India to be, to continue that salami slicing. But what next? We'll keep a close eye on all developments and that likely dialogue between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping here in Kazan, Russia. That is all I have for you on this special broadcast. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.